us. So we will go ahead and start recording here. And just welcome everybody to our next Wisdom Wednesday. We are really excited to have Dr. Rachel Pierce here, our Assistant Director of the Counseling Center, as well as Dr. Kirk Skoglund here, our Director of the Learning Center, to kind of lead initiatives in talking about time management and stress management. And I will also introduce Lauren. Can you remind me of your title again, Lauren?
Yeah, I'm a counseling center intern for this academic year. Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm so glad that you're with us today too. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So I'm actually going to record this today for everybody in attendance so we can upload it to our Rockhurst University Success Coaching YouTube page under Wisdom Wednesdays channel to reference in the future. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Kirk right now, and we'll get started on some time management tips.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I am going to talk a little bit about time management and procrastination today. And Kristy, I don't know, do we want to start with, do you want me to share my screen with the presentation, or is there anything you wanted me to do?
That would be great. Yeah, you can just share your screen if that works for you, or I'd be happy to share it as well.
Let me just go ahead and get everything. Actually, if you don't mind doing it, sorry, I don't have it downloaded yet, I don't think. Oh, I could get it. Never mind. Just awful slow today.
That's for you.
So,
no, you're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
All good. All good. So can everybody see it? Does that look good? Okay. So, So we are going to be talking a little bit about time management and more specifically procrastination, because at this point in the semester, I remember being in these shoes at the middle point in the semester. It's really hard to motivate yourself. Deadlines are piling up. Sometimes you can't even help it that you're procrastinating because you're just running out of time, it seems like, all over the place. So I'm going to talk about basically some different strategies of sort of reasons why we might be procrastinating, sort of thinking through some of those different reasons there, and then maybe some strategies essentially on how to overcome those, as well as my own personal anecdotes relating to procrastination. So I think the first off is time management as a concept and as a skill is something that's really crucial for students, naturally, to be able to get everything in, to be able to get assignments done, to be able to complete them on time. It's also just a good lifelong skill as well. And I think sometimes we see time management in the context of education, but truthfully, it's really important for life skills. So thinking about, how are we, managing our time with work and family and social obligations and all those types of things. So time management and procrastination affects us beyond school as well. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that this has a larger purpose than just our semester here at Rockhurst. But we first do need to get through this semester and engage and be successful in that way. So one of the things that I think is happening when we're thinking about procrastination is sort of this deception of time. We often, whenever we're thinking about completing tasks, thinking that we have more time than we actually really do. We think some things like forever away. Like for me, Thanksgiving is ages away right now. And it's probably about 2 weeks away, I think, at this point in time. And that's really not that far away. I have a conference presentation here in a couple of weeks, and I'm like, oh, that's just so long. But it's really not. And so sometimes we have that sense of, oh, we have way more time than we actually do. The other thing is that we're really bad about estimating how much time it takes to actually complete tasks. And so we think certain things won't be able to take as much time as they actually do. For me, in my head, a 5-page paper, oh, that doesn't seem like that many pages. I forget, and for some reason, after all these years of school, that I'm a terrible writer, and it takes me ages to write 1 page, let alone 5. So, I think we often just sort of think we won't have as much time, or it won't take as much time to do it. We also think we're going to feel like doing it later. If we don't feel like doing it right now, we're probably going to feel like we're going to do it later, and we're going to be more motivated to do it later. That sort of imaginary tomorrow that things are all going to be good and we're going to be motivated to complete all the tasks. We also think that we're only going to be successful if we feel like doing it. that we have to be motivated to complete a task in order to be successful at that task. And then we also think it's maybe going to be a waste of time if we're not motivated to complete the task. And I think it's important to realize is that all these are false. Like we have that ability to be successful at a task, even if we're not motivated to do it, or even if we don't want to do it in that moment. And sometimes it's what you have to do in those pieces there. So when we think about why we procrastinate, there's really 8 reasons that I talk about. Sort of this idea of perfectionism. So, if we think it has to be perfect, or we maybe won't do it, or we'll try to do other things to make it perfect. So I think that's why I don't like writing so much as a person, is because writing is such an art. It's all about how well can you craft this, and there's always things you can do to improve things. And so for me, I always wanted my writing to be perfect, and there's no such thing, right? So that perfectionism is definitely a reason that sometimes we procrastinate. That fear of failure, sort of thinking that if we're not going to do well, or if we're going to fail, we might as well just not do it. I had a student that was just like, oh, I didn't prepare for a test, so I just didn't go take it. And that's that fear and failure and action, sort of that sense of not being prepared. Being overwhelmed. I'm going to use writing as an example a lot, so it really just shows you how despising I find writing in general as an academic task. But papers overwhelm me whenever I'm a student. So for me, like those tasks that are so big and complicated, it's hard to even get started. It's hard to even get started in those moments. Sometimes it's just a little bit of laziness. We don't feel like doing something, or we lack of motivation, or we're just really just not feeling it. Other things are going on and we're drained. Poor time management. So, things about like we haven't managed our time well. So suddenly this task has crept up on us, or we haven't been able to juggle certain things, or we've spent our time unwisely in certain aspects of our lives. So those are reasons why we might procrastinate. Rebellion. So sometimes parents or other people have these expectations for us doing certain things. And maybe we procrastinate to sort of rebel against that. Lack of motivation. So that's kind of similar to laziness, but basically that no motivation to a task. When it's a rainy day, sometimes I really struggle to like be active, be productive, and do things. And sometimes that can really cause procrastination. And then unsure and difficulty of the task. It's kind of like being overwhelmed, but sometimes the task is complex or unclear, or we're not really sure about what we're supposed to be doing. And so we procrastinate because we don't even know where to begin. We don't know how to start it. We don't know what questions to ask. We don't know how to break it down. So given these reasons, I think one of the first important steps is kind of to identify your reason. Like as you think about procrastinating for whatever specific task that you have on hand, like why are you procrastinating? And you might have to do some self-reflection in that moment, to sort of think through sort of, do I want this to be perfect, or am I worried about failing? Am I overwhelmed by this task? And it could be multiple of these, it could be several of these all at once. And so really identifying sort of that reason of why you're procrastinating in that moment might be a useful first step, because then you can start to build strategies to help you overcome that and seek help and resources to overcome those reasons. So in general, we're going to talk about some just strategies for overcoming procrastination. So the first one is sort of letting feelings follow action. And whenever I was reading about some of this stuff, this one sounded like it was easier said than done. This is definitely not one that I would be able to implement. But the idea is that if you're worried about it being perfect, or you're worried about failing, those are really valid and important feelings, but to let the action start first and then put off that feeling for later, which isn't something that I feel like I'm very capable of doing myself. But some people might be able to compartmentalize in that and be like, okay, I'll worry later about this after it's done. So that can be one strategy for overcoming procrastination, given certain reasons. sometimes just starting, even if that means tricking yourself into starting. It's kind of surprising, but sometimes just getting the ball rolling is going to really help. So often whenever I have to study or do other tasks, I'll set a timer for like 10 minutes and just be like, okay, I can do 10 minutes. I'm just going to start for 10 minutes. And then whatever I get done, I get done. And more often than not, I just keep going after the timer goes off because I've started getting into a role and a groove of kind of what I'm doing. So sometimes just starting can help you feel like you're doing something and help you kind of get over that hump. Reframe your expectations. So we all think that certain tasks are going to go a certain way, or we're going to feel a certain way when we're doing it. Kind of going back to that whole idea of we think we need to feel motivated in order to complete a task successfully. So sometimes reframing your expectations on what that task is going to look like. I know writing is going to be a painful experience for me. So how can I reframe my expectations as it relates to writing to get some joy out of it, to be more realistic as I approach the task, to make it more manageable for me, and reframe how I'm approaching that as I go about that. Don't expect perfection. So it's really easy and rich coming from a perfectionist like myself. But what I would say is that nothing's perfect, right? And that's okay. So I feel like for me, one of the things that can help with this is sort of, as long as you're doing the best you can't really ask any more of yourself. Often the point of what you're doing here in college is sort of this idea of growth and the ability to grow. And sometimes perfection gets in the way of that goal. So if you can reframe and think about it in terms of a growing experience, and that things won't be perfect now, but you're going to continue to get better at this, sometimes that can help you overcome that. Discover the cost of procrastinating and sort of the implied here and the benefits of not procrastinating. So something that might be helpful, it would be to sort of take stock of sort of the stress, what things you miss out on whenever you're procrastinating, like if friends are going out to dinner and suddenly you can't because you have to write something or complete an assignment. What would happen if you failed an assignment because you were procrastinating? Like, would you have to retake a class, and what would the cost be associated with that? So sometimes making a list of all those negative consequences of what procrastinating might be can be a nice motivator. I kind of hate focusing just on the negative. So I think it's also really important to think about what are the positive things that would happen if you didn't procrastinating. You would get to do these fun things, or you'd be better asleep, or you'd have time for exercise, or whatever things those might be, and take those lists and have those with you, like physically write those down. So then that way, when you have those moments where you are kind of procrastinating, think through sort of the pros and cons of doing that, so that you're at least making it a more informed decision when it comes to procrastination. Breaking down tasks or making a list. So I think this is one that when the tasks are overwhelming or you're just not really sure how to start, these are really great strategies to overcome that. So as I've mentioned many times, writing is not my strong suit and not something I really enjoy. So I have to break that task down into really small pieces and manageable bites for me to be able to accomplish it. Whenever when I was writing my dissertation, I would do things such as small as like find 2 sources. That's all I'm doing today. Like that's what I need to do today. And it helped me kind of break it into those manageable chunks and pieces so that I could slowly make progress on those goals. Also, it's really satisfying when you have a huge list, or you have a list and you're crossing things off. The other thing that's sort of a trick here with that is whenever just about professionally, personally, sometimes whenever I have a moment where I need to focus, sometimes I take just a Post-it note and rewrite kind of the 2 or 3 things I want to get accomplished in the time that I have. So it kind of refocuses my energy in that moment to make do with that energy that I have there. Reward yourself. So there's a technique called the Pomodoro technique, which is basically, I can't remember exactly the time frames, but essentially you study for 20 minutes, and you take a break for like 10 minutes, and you study for 20 more minutes, and you take a break for 10 minutes. So it's kind of a way to reward yourself for studying for 20 minutes and then to break up your studying, so that way you're not bogged down by the experience of studying. But rewarding yourself could also be offering incentives for completing tasks. Ideally, in an ideal world, we would have that intrinsic motivation that, oh, I want to do well in these classes because I want to be successful in my future career, or I want to learn these skills. Like, those are great motivators. But sometimes we're in courses or we're in moments where those things just don't quite motivate us to complete the task or motivate us to do that. So sometimes we have to kind of add those extrinsic motivators. So for me, food's a great extrinsic motivator. I'm going to have a candy bar if I get this done, or if I get this done, I'll watch my favorite Netflix show. When I was in my master's degree, I, again, did not like writing. So I would do my little, I would tell myself I would write a paragraph. And then after that paragraph, I could watch 5 minutes of my favorite TV show. And then I could write another paragraph. And then I could watch 5 more minutes. And honestly, it worked so well for me, because I was like, okay, I'm just going to just spend the whole afternoon watching these basically 2 TV shows, because I would only get 5 minutes at a time. But I would be motivated to write that paragraph so that I could get back to that TV show. And 1 paragraph for me was very manageable. I was like, I can write it, 5 sentences. This has got it. I got this. So sometimes those little rewards, you've probably seen pictures online where someone has in their textbook like little jelly beans if they get so far. It's that idea of like, if you, as you're reading along, you get to the jelly bean, you suddenly get to eat the jelly bean. So giving yourself those little rewards can be helpful. Reduce and manage distractions. Those are everywhere. Distractions are a huge part of our existence now. I mean, I think about what college students are experiencing now with like TikTok and YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and all those things. I often am like, oh, this feels like it's so much more than it was when I was in school. I think that maybe is inaccurate. I think maybe we all have distractions when we're going through school. It's just different distractions, and they're maybe a little bit more pervasive now than they were when I was in school. But it's really understandable. I mean, there's so much good content on Netflix and all the other streaming services. You could spend forever doing those things instead of the work that you need to do. It would probably be a lot more enjoyable. So there's a huge task at hand and a huge amount of discipline that goes into managing those distractions. There's a couple of things that I would recommend, and I'll make sure I get this link out too, but I found 6 apps that kind of help your smartphone addiction. But it's basically apps that will help you like limit your time on certain social media apps. Unfortunately, they're not all free, which I don't love. I'd love for those to be free. But they can be a really useful tool to kind of monitor how much time you're spending on Instagram and to be able to limit that amount of time. One of the things I personally have done to help limit some of those distractions is to turn off notifications, particularly if I really don't need notifications for certain apps. It then actually makes it more enjoyable when I do get to engage with the app, because I'm like, oh, look at all these notifications I have. This is super exciting, right? So, but I made that choice to engage with that app versus it telling me to engage with it. So sometimes those notifications are designed to actually pull you into that and to intentionally distract you and to pull your attention. So taking that moment to turn those notifications off, particularly if you don't need it, for those apps can be a great step and almost a freeing step in the right direction. Just as simple as putting your phone face down by you can be a huge step in terms of managing those distractions. When I was in grad school, there's a lot of like add-ins for Chrome and other browsers. Chrome is my browser of choice. One of them is called Stay Focused. It basically limits your time on certain apps and websites and those types of things during certain periods of the day. So I could set from 8 to 5. I could only be on Facebook for 10 minutes. And, at the time, Facebook was really, really big when I was doing this. But then after 10 minutes, it would block it anytime I tried to go to Facebook, and I would have to go back out of it. Now, after that time period was up, I could go back and use Facebook as much as I wanted, but it was a great way for me to kind of be more mindful about the time and manage those distractions as I go through it. So those are just some ideas, but you'd be surprised how much those distractions, the little distractions here and there, are really truly pulling your attention away from the task. The last thing I would say is ask for help. We're here. There's a ton of resources here on campus. No one gets through life without assistance from other people. So we want to help you. Your friends want to help. Just ask for the assistance. There's office hours available. There's resources out there. There's tons of folks that are ready to step in and support you in this. Procrastination is something we all deal with at one time or another in different ways and at differing levels. So I think we all can relate to this, and we're all happy to help with that. I feel like I'm going a little bit over time, so my apologies. But just some additional Learning Center resources. We have this resources page that has a couple things like daily planners, some time management tips. We do have some of this overcoming procrastination where I take each of those reasons why we procrastinate and talk about individual strategies that I mentioned today that would help with that particular reason. There's this self-assessment and tips. It's not a true self-assessment. It's more of just open-ended reflection questions that ask you to think about your procrastination. And just some other little resources here that might be helpful. We do have some time management tutoring available in the Learning Center where they'll help you build a schedule and kind of manage your time more effectively. And then, of course, we have a lot of other resources in the Learning Center, such as tutoring, supplemental instruction, and an alternative testing space. Are there any questions, though, before I shift gears, or we shift gears to Rachel and Lauren?
Yeah, I just had a comment. Thank you for using the writing papers as an example. I think that is something so many people struggle with. So I thought your examples were, just wonderful and spot on. So just appreciate that a lot. And I have heard from so many Rockhurst students that the time management tutoring is so worthwhile, like where they go through and set up the schedule. So, even as we kind of get into finals, if people are wanting to set that as a goal for themselves, just really appreciate the Learning Center doing that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So I think a lot of these, and I definitely don't want to step on my colleagues' toes over in the counseling center. There's a lot of these I think would really benefit from a deeper dive and sort of some of those underlying reasons and some way beyond my area of expertise too. So I do want to give that caveat and recommendation referral to that great resource as well.
All right, so we will move on to our wonderful counseling center now on stress management and shifting our mindset. Thank you so much, Kirk. Really appreciate all of those wonderful tips for students as we kind of move on to the last, five-ish weeks of classes, which is really hard to believe that we'll start studying for finals here soon. So just really appreciate your time today. So I'll kick it over to the counseling center now.
And Rachel, I can control the PowerPoint. Is that okay?
That would be great. Yeah. I was just going to ask if you wouldn't mind doing that. Okay. Appreciate that. Well, that was really great, Kirk. And thanks too for the shout out about how the counseling center can support students who are trying to figure out what their procrastination might be about. Lauren was saying just before we started, she was just working with a student on that, and definitely not a week goes by where I'm not talking with a student about what's driving their procrastination. And sometimes there is some deeper stuff there. And so we're happy to delve into that a little bit. Our focus for our part here today is on stress management. And I wanted to just kind of intro this by saying we intentionally are talking today about shifting our mindset about stress management because a lot of times when we talk about stress, even the word stress brings up stress. It just has such a negative connotations. Then we even talk about we have to manage our stress like it's this big, bad, scary thing. And certainly stress can cause a lot of negative outcomes in our life, which is why we're here talking about it. But there's some really cool recent research and thinking on stress that really talks about how we can kind of turn that on its side and change how we're thinking about stress and basically help it be a tool that can help us rather than something that is getting in our way and messing things up for us. So that's kind of the framework that we want to use here today. So we can go on to the next slide, and I think Lauren's going to do some intro here.
Yes. So yeah, Rachel's given us this kind of framework we're working with today about shifting our mindset. And so again, even though we often think of stress as being caused by things that are bad or unhappy or negative, it can also be caused by good or happy or positive things as well. We don't often think of it that way, but there's different levels of stress, which can kind of determine the extent to which it's either a positive or negative experience to be experiencing that stress. So stress can be problematic when that stress level is greater than our ability to cope with it. So when that stress level is so high that we just cannot handle the extent to which it's affecting us. And so this is often what we are referring to when we're saying that we are stressed, we're stressed people. But again, this idea that not all stress is bad and it can even have beneficial effects, which may be a new idea to some of us. I know for me, it's a reframe that I often have to use when I'm in academic situations or writing situations, as Kirk mentioned. But this idea of eustress. So eustress is this idea of when we have enough of a stress level, but we also have enough of this like well-being or kind of this competitive mindset, like it's meeting this level of stress is met with this level of our own skill level, and we're able to kind of meet that stress level where it's at. And this actually can increase or improve our own performance, our motivation, our well-being. Think of like an athlete who gets a little bit of those nervous jitters before a race or before a game. That's like the perfect example of eustress, when that energy can actually really get someone to that place that they want to be, to their kind of peak performance, if that makes sense. And then actually, we may not think about this too much, but not enough stress can actually be problematic for us, especially in work or academic situations, because it can lead to being bored or stagnant or not having enough drive or motivation. So stress really can motivate us, and not having it, say you're just not feeling challenged in your academic program, maybe that means that you need to up the ante a bit so that you can kind of step out of this maybe feeling of stagnancy or boredom. So yeah, I'm gonna hand it back to Rachel for the next slide.
Okay, so as Lauren was saying there, sometimes really when we're talking about, oh, I'm so stressed, what we're really talking about is the distress end of that spectrum. So not the eustress, but the distress end of things. And so I don't think anything on this slide will be super, groundbreaking or mind-blowing to anybody that's listening, because we all kind of know what it looks like when we are feeling that unhealthy or unhelpful kind of stress. It has effects in all areas of our life. So body or physical health, tons of symptoms that can show up: headaches, upset stomach, tense muscles, fatigue, not sleeping well, eating too much or not eating enough, getting sick. How many times have I met with students around this time of year where they come in and they're like, oh, I have a cold. I always get a cold at the end of the semester. Yep, because we're stressed and our immune system is worn down. So it can show up in lots of different ways in our body, and it can be kind of situational things like having a headache, and it can be longer term health things like developing stomach ulcers or high blood pressure and other chronic illnesses. Of course, it affects our mind and our cognitive health. So we're not thinking as clearly, we might be worrying a lot, making not great decisions, maybe being impulsive, more distracted, having a hard time focusing. Overall, all that contributes to difficulty learning, which really becomes kind of a vicious cycle, because what you're trying to do here is learn, and you're getting stressed out and it's making it harder to learn, which makes you more stressed out. And so we kind of cycle in that way. Forgetfulness is a thing that happens. I know that I experienced when I'm at high levels of stress, and usually that's a clue to me that my stress is getting out of hand, because things just start slipping through the cracks, things that I normally don't lose track of. It's like, oh, okay, maybe I need to step back and get myself organized and deal with some stress here. Loss of motivation, Lauren kind of talked about, but also rigidity is a feature of high levels of stress, of just kind of getting locked in on things having to be a certain way and not being able to be flexible and adjust in the moment. Emotionally, all the feelings that come up, anxiety, we can be crabby, we kind of have these little inner temper tantrums, just like a little kid might. Hopefully it doesn't show up in quite the same way. Might even escalate to the point of panic attacks or developing depressed mood. It's very common to see loss of confidence, just not feeling so great in our ability, just kind of feeling frazzled and not together, frustrated, overwhelmed. These are all words that we hear a lot when people have been under a level of distress for some time. spiritual health, this doesn't necessarily only refer to religious health, but just kind of like, you know, this idea of mind, body, spirit, like who you are as a person and feeling kind of good in that space. We can kind of feel like we've lost our purpose. We might feel sort of hopeless or pessimistic, or we might feel like we are disconnected from our values, or aren't able to kind of just stay on the course that we have set for ourselves. We might also start to be not so kind to ourselves. So that's that lack of self-compassion, just being really hard on ourselves in a way that we wouldn't be to other people, but we can be really hard on ourselves. And then behaviorally, obviously it's going to show up there as well. And so we can kind of revert to some unhealthy ways of coping. That could be things like using substances. It can be things like avoidance, which ties into the procrastination and time management piece that Kirk just talked about. It could be doing things to distract ourselves that aren't good uses of our time, or maybe have other negative consequences. It's pretty common to isolate. So we might start pulling away from others. We might, it's interesting, this time of year, we start to see more no-shows and cancellations of counseling appointments. And it's sort of ironic because then when the student comes in, they'll say, oh, this is probably the time where I most needed to come in and talk about stuff, but I just was overwhelmed and couldn't deal with it. And so I just didn't come in. And so isolating from sources of support is a sign as well. And then disorganization, which we touched on. Okay, next slide.
Yeah, so again, just this idea, I feel like our biggest point today is just this idea of shifting our mindset a bit and actually not letting stress have ownership over us, but us just kind of recognizing how stress can actually work in our favor and work for us. So stress, again, can be good for you if we're thinking about it in terms of eustress, which, to reiterate, eustress is this idea. If we're looking at a nice, I wish we had a little picture of this. If we were looking at a nice little spectrum, we're on the bottom on our little x-axis here is stress, level of stress, and our y-axis is level of performance. You know, we have this sort of like nice little bell curve if we want to get researchy. And at one end where there's low stress and low performance is where we'll have kind of that boredom we were talking about, not really just experiencing much stress. And that middle where we're at peak performance and kind of an average level of stress is that eustress. So that's our sweet spot. That's where we want to be. That's what really helps motivate us and drive us in our education and in our work. And really just kind of, I would imagine, gives us a fulfilled feeling. I know for myself, I feel really fulfilled when I feel like I'm just kind of at this like sweet spot of stress and performance, really working at that peak spot. And then at the far end of our spectrum, we have too much stress, which can really impact our performance and lead to that distress and all those different symptoms that Rachel was just describing. And so we want to just recognize or acknowledge that stress really can be energy for action. It can be something that fuels us, that motivates us, but it's important for us to recognize and to validate that challenge is different than threat. So if the stress that we're experiencing is something that is actually threatening to us or surpassing our ability to cope to a point where we're at a level where we just really feel like we can't do certain things anymore or handle it, that's a really good sign that the stress is something that's surpassing that kind of that sweet spot of performance. And it would be important to talk to someone about that, whether that's people over at the Learning Center or coming to Counseling Center. So again, just like, you know, we can be perfectionistic. We can try to push ourselves a little too far sometimes, but be kind to yourself and recognize that the stress you're experiencing is more of a threatening level rather than that challenging level, while also acknowledging that maybe you yourself do need that mindset shift and realize, oh, like, yeah, I'm stressed, but like, I'm actually kind of really cruising. Like, I'm doing a good job this semester. Like, it can be both, or it could be either or. So just recognize maybe what that looks like for you and where you may be on that spectrum. But know that our thoughts are powerful, and the way we talk to ourselves is really powerful. And so just like this little quote at the bottom mentions, when you change your mind about stress, you change your body's response to stress. So our brains are really moldable. And when we can kind of convince our brains or help remind and reframe our brains that stress isn't always bad for us, we can actually change some of those responses that and those symptoms that Rachel was talking about in the slide prior. We can change the way our body reacts to those things and end up having a bit more of a positive reaction, or at least not as severe a reaction. Next slide. You're muted, Rachel.
So sorry, everyone. On that last slide, Kirk, I don't know if that first link will work to show a little video. If not, I can definitely do a quick summary and put it in the chat, but if it will.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize it was a link.
That's okay. That's okay. It's a perfect transition actually to do it at this point. So it's all good. And it does open Facebook. So we'll see if it'll just go straight to this video. Hopefully it will.
I don't think I shared my sound, so
Okay,
give me
that's
a
okay.
second to do that.
That's okay. We don't have to.
That's okay. I think I'll get it now. So.
Not inevitable. How you think. The harmful effects of stress on your health are not inevitable. How you think and how you act can transform your experience of stress. Now, that is exactly what participants were told in a study conducted at Harvard University. Before they went through the social stress test, they were taught to rethink their stress response as helpful. That pounding heart is preparing you for action. If you're breathing faster, it's no problem. It's getting more oxygen to your brain. And participants who learned to view the stress response as helpful for their performance, well, they were less stressed out, less anxious, more confident. But the most fascinating finding to me was how their physical stress response changed. Their heart was still pounding, but this is a much healthier cardiovascular profile. It actually looks a lot like what happens in moments of joy and courage.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Kirk. So that's really just a quick little snippet of a much larger TED Talk that I would encourage you to take a look at if you want to learn more about this. But this is kind of the key point of this mindset shift, is that if we can think about stress as being something that can help us and our body and our mind's way of preparing us to do something to deal with our situation, then it completely changes the way stress plays out in our body. And it's some really fascinating research that shows that people who view stress as a good thing don't have all of those negative impacts of stress that I talked about on that other slide. In fact, they tend to be very healthy and they're able to transform that stress into something that they can use to deal with the situation. So the classic example that I love, and it's one that Lauren just talked about a little bit too, is that athletes getting ready for a game or a race or a match have that level of jitteriness, but they interpret that as a good thing. They're like, yes, I am ready to go. I have this energy. Let's go. Let's do this. They want to do the thing. And so they're moving towards it. And they view that all of those internal physical symptoms as a good sign that they're ready. And in fact, an athlete will tell you that if they don't feel that way, they know they're not going to perform real well because they're just going to kind of come out flat. But when in the rest of our lives, we have some of those same feelings, like I'm feeling nervous, I'm feeling jittery, and we interpret it negatively, like, oh, I'm so anxious, I can't cope, this is overwhelming. And if we can shift our mindset, which is a subtle thing and not always an easy thing, but if we can kind of change that mindset and think, okay, this is my brain recognizing that I have a challenge in front of me and giving me energy to deal with it, then the negative effects of it really tend to fall away, and we tend to be able to use that energy in a way that helps us. So this graphic here kind of tries to summarize it. So instead of thinking of stress as a threat, a demoralizer, overwhelming pressure, something that's debilitating, going to shut us down, and trying to fight that and trying to focus on the problem, if we can instead think of stress as, okay, this is a challenge, this is a motivator, this is energy that I need, this is an opportunity. And what could happen if I jump in and try to work on this thing, whether it's studying for a test or writing a paper? What are the possibilities? Maybe it'll go great, instead of, oh my gosh, it's going to be terrible. Maybe it'll go great. And using stress as a tool, because after all, that's how your body is designed, right? To give you this reaction because you need it to deal with something. Then stress kind of becomes your friend. It becomes something that you can use. Okay, next slide.
So we want to take a moment to just give you a real easy 4 A's to deal with stress. So some ways to kind of change the way you approach stress and make friends with it a bit, like Rachel was just talking about. So first A, alter. This could mean altering plans. This could mean altering your environment. This could mean altering the way you choose to approach your homework. Maybe you usually do it with friends. Maybe you're doing it by yourself. So what altering is indicating is this idea of planning ahead or anticipating how you're going to approach that thing that is stressing you out, how you're going to take control of your surroundings, how you're going to say no, which can be really hard sometimes, and also just prioritizing. So, I just talked with someone earlier who we needed to think through, like, okay, how are we going to like make today different? Like, you have a 2-hour time block. Are we going to, are you going to study in the library? Are you going to study in a common area? Are you going to study by yourself? Are you going to have your phone on you or not? Like, how can we just break down into those baby steps of how can we actually alter what's going on for you to feel less stress or avoidance of the thing that you're kind of procrastinating on in that specific instance. But the second A is adapt. So as humans, we are just these wonderful, adaptable beings. And so one of the ways we can really just adapt is by changing our standards or expectations. So kind of like Kirk was mentioning, just, maybe being a little less perfectionistic, maybe just, putting enough time or like setting a time limit. I'm going to give this much time to this thing that's stressing me out, and then I'm going to let it go, or I'm just going to kind of stop thinking about it or stop addressing it. So just changing your expectations or standards of how you approach something, maybe practicing that thought stopping, which again, kind of sounds like what I was just discussing. So maybe you need to just tell yourself, set a timer for 5 minutes and say, I'm going to give myself 5 minutes to think about this thing that's really stressing me out. And then I'm just going to stop. That is the time it's allotted. And we're going to stop that thought. Also, additionally, just cultivating this positive outlook. So just really trying to find those things, maybe those things you're grateful for, or maybe what it is about this thing that's stressing you out that is helping push you towards your goals or is helping you in your personal life or whatever. Find that benefit to the stressful thing. And if there's not a single benefit that you can find to the stressful thing, maybe we need to reevaluate what exactly the source of this stress is. Additionally, having mantras, we see so many of these now. I can do this. I literally have a sign on my wall here that says, you can do this. So just finding those phrases or words that can really speak to you and encourage you. Tapping into your strengths. And if you have a hard time identifying strengths, either ask a friend or find a resource on campus, someone who can help you identify what you're really good at, like what you bring to the table, and just practicing that gratitude. The third A is accept. So, oh my goodness, avoidance, which kind of relates to the fourth A. Avoidance can be so hard when we just resist the things that are stressing us out. Like resistance can double that pain that stress is causing. So if you can just see things as they are and address them accordingly, let go of some of the small things and learn from mistakes and stressful situations, just accepting things as they are, it really can kind of reduce some of the pain associated with things. In therapy, there's this specific, or counseling, there's a specific area or approach to counseling called acceptance and commitment therapy. And so if we can just really take time to sort of accept how we're feeling, accept where we're at, accept circumstances, it can actually really reduce how much it's affecting us in a negative way. And lastly, approach, not avoid. So approach your stress. Go ahead and just take a look at it. Look closer, hold it in your hand metaphorically for a second and really just look at it. What's going on there? Move towards the problem. Access supports. There's tons of supports here at Rockhurst. Make a plan, face your anxieties. Just recognize that you don't have to avoid it. Avoidance can really, really just be off-putting to us. So if you can just take a moment and just give yourself the chance to look at what's causing you stress, it might end up being a little less distressing. Anything to add to that, Rachel?
No, that was great. Thank you. All right, next slide. So we recognize in putting this together that we're throwing a lot of concepts and ideas out, and certainly what helps any given person with their stress at any given time is going to be unique to them in that context. And so we're throwing a lot at you. And so we wanted to also give you just a few quick takeaways that we think can help anybody, no matter the situation. And this are things that you can actually do pretty simply now. In terms of those bigger picture things, or some of those concepts that Lauren was talking about just a second ago, just want to plug that the Counseling Center, again, is a great place to try to unpack a little bit more about maybe what's causing you to have a hard time coping with stress. And so hopefully you got some ideas, maybe some things jumped out to you that like, ooh, maybe I need to follow up on that. And if you would like some support in doing that, we would definitely love to accompany you on that journey as you explore that. But in terms of some practical tips that you can use now, something I use a lot with my clients, and honestly in my own life, when I am at that point of feeling overwhelmed and it just feels like there's so much going on and it's all just sort of bouncing around in my head and I can't get a grip on any one thing to deal with it, is to make a stress map. So I put a little example up here, just sort of a hypothetical student who, let's say, is a first-year student and they are taking a chemistry class that's giving them trouble and they're kind of on the edge of passing or failing. They're having car problems, they're having money problems, they feel like they're not fitting in and they're feeling lonely. They're also in a long distance relationship and they, oh, by the way, don't know what they want to do for the rest of their life, so they can't pick a major. Okay, that's a pretty stressful situation, right? And so it can help sometimes just to write down all the different things that are contributing to stress and just write them down and put them in on these little blobs really on a piece of paper, and then start to draw some connections. So maybe the student realizes that them not doing well in chemistry is causing them to doubt what their major is, because they thought maybe they were going to go to PT school, but they're struggling in chemistry, so maybe they don't know. And so that's connected. Their chemistry grade is also suffering because they're in a long distance relationship, and so they're spending a lot of time, going to visit their partner, and so they're not able to study. And then you see some other things on there too, like, oh, the car problems and the money problems, those certainly relate. The car problems connect to the long distance relationship. Not fitting in, feeling lonely connect as well. So the idea here is that when you can put it all down on paper and start to see how things are connected, a lot of times you see that it's actually not 7 or 8 or 37 problems. It's like 2 or 3 problems that are showing up in a number of different ways. And right there, it helps it become a little bit more manageable, helps us organize our thinking, or helps us see like, ooh, here's this one thing that's kind of at the center of all of my stress or a lot of my stress. And that's the thing I need to drill down and get to work on first, because then the rest of this will start to feel a little bit better. So just getting it out of your head, getting it in front of your face can help you understand it better and know what direction to go. Opening up. Kind of touched on this earlier, but when we are very stressed out, we tend to be more prone to shutting down and isolating. And so accessing those supports, just talking to people around us, talking to your friends is so, so valuable. Students, well, all people, but I have experienced that students tend to think that they're the only ones that feel this way, or it looks to them like other people are coping so much better, because on the outside, it looks like they're all doing great. While on the inside, you know that you're feeling like you're out of control and overly stressed. But I promise you that every other student feels that way too. If not right this minute, they have felt that way recently. And so sometimes just being able to say that to someone and have someone else go, yep, I get it, you're not alone, can help. On top of that, opening up to somebody else, they might see something differently than you do. They might have an idea of something you can try. And so that's, just icing on the cake. Practicing mindfulness could be a whole other presentation, which maybe we'll get to do sometime. Could actually be a whole full-time course. But practicing mindfulness not only gives us some breaks during the day where we can calm our minds down, but it also helps us learn the skill of directing our attention and of being aware of what's going on in our heads, because there's always stuff going on in our heads. And a lot of it isn't super helpful in the moment, but we just kind of let it go on and chatter in the back of our minds. And so learning mindfulness helps us be better aware of where our attention is. And so, of course, that helps everywhere in life, specifically academically as well. So in case you're not aware, please do investigate and download the Sandvello app. That is an app that is based on mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy. And the university actually pays for everyone affiliated with Rockhurst to have a free full subscription to Sandvello, which would normally be like $70 a year or something. So if you download it and register with your Rockhurst email, you get the full access. And there are like 40 different mindfulness meditation recordings. There's an emotions tracker. There's a guided journey to learn about anxiety. There's all kinds of wonderful things in that app. So that's a very easy thing that you can do right now and spend 5 minutes doing a deep breathing meditation and then go from there and explore more. Move your body. Remember, we talked about how stress sets off all of these physical things in your body, this rush of energy, feeling jittery, heart pounding. That's because your body is designed for action. And so unfortunately, a lot of the things that cause us stress don't require us to run or to exert a lot of physical energy. It's a lot more sitting still and using mental energy. So getting up and moving your body can take the edge off of that excess stress energy that we're feeling. And there's also tons and tons of research that exercise is basically an antidepressant. It basically works like medicine for stress, anxiety, depression. So getting up and moving your body is something that you can do today that will definitely help. And then kind of to double dip on the mindfulness, because I think it's that important. Even if you don't sit and do a 5 or 10 minute guided meditation, just practicing deep breathing, even if it's just 2 minutes, 3 times a day, is a great reset to the stress response. So stress can kind of build in our body, and sometimes we need to just take a minute and help dial it down a couple notches. And it's as simple as a couple minutes of deep breathing a few times a day can help do that. So those hopefully are some quick takeaways that you could put into action today. And then hopefully you can reflect on some of the bigger picture messages that we sent and tap into the resources like the Counseling Center and the Learning Center and the Student Success Coaches that can help you cater those strategies and make a plan that's specific to your situation. And
Great.
That's it.
Thank you, Rachel and Lauren, so much. That was awesome. There were 2 things that I super loved. The stress map. I think everybody could benefit from making those. I think that is, wonderful. And then what you said, Lauren, about the way we talk to ourselves and how powerful that is. I loved that too. I think that's, something that all of us can do on a daily basis is, talk to ourselves a little kinder and really set some attainable goals for ourselves. So for those who are tuning in on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us today. We will send all of these wonderful resources and links from the Learning Center and the Counseling Center out when we send out this video as well. So thank you so much. And thank all of you for all of your time and effort with this. We really appreciate your time. We'll see you soon.